This is a 2003 Hyundai Elantra. It's here for wheel bearing noise. And go ahead and jack the car up on that side and put a jack stand under it. Take your wheel off. It's 21mm nuts. Take the quarter pin out of your axle nut and loosen the nut up and knock the axle back. Just make sure it's loose inside the wheel bearing. Go ahead and pull your 17mm bolts out of your spindle, the strut area. Once you take your bolts out of the spindle here, you can tilt this spindle back and pull the axle out of it and lay it aside. Take your brake hose, hold down and bolt out, 12mm, and take your two caliper support bracket bolts out, they're 17mm, and take your tie rod end off, 17mm nut on it. Once the brake caliper is off, go ahead and take your rotor off if it hasn't fell off yet. Your ball joint nut loose. I wire brush all these bolt ends and threads before I take them loose. Can save a bunch of trouble later. I'm just using a cheap tie rod separator. It goes right up against where the axle goes in. Just make sure it stays centered on that stud and you don't screw the threads up. You can leave the nut down there, but it might be a little difficult to get off since it's self-locking after it's broke loose. That didn't take much effort at all. This wheel bearing has a snap ring in it. Should spray down lubricating oil. Took a screwdriver and scraped all the rust from around that snap ring and sprayed some lubricating oil on it. It's got two hooks right there. It's supposed to use like a pair of heavy-duty snap ring pliers. I haven't got them here. I'm going to just take a hammer and hit them hooks to dislodge that clip first. I'm just taking a pair of needle nose and dislodging this clip. Like that. I'll clean that up around this perimeter. Now the idea is to support this spindle. Put this in a press and press this centerpiece through those bearings out. This is what the new bearing looks like. One solid outside race, two separate inside races. And when I press this hub, got the lug nut studs fixed in it, out, it's going to take this inside race right out of the ball bearings and be stuck on this hub. Then I'll have to fish it off. I gotta press this hub. Has a tube, passes through the inside of this wheel bearing and comes out right here. We've got this in a press. I just taped a couple of sockets together to make stands, whatever spacers I need to make sure the center is level. press it on down with the two caliper ears and the tie rod end ear. This one's going pretty easy. It's either been changed before or something's happened. Like that. Well, it came out like I expected it would. The race stayed on the hub, and the other part stayed in the bearing. Heated that inner race up. Got it that far, but it was really a pain. Took a cut-off tool and cut a gash through it. And hit that with a chisel, and that thing will fracture and fall pretty much right off of there. The only thing when you're dealing with that hard steel, you need to cover it up with a rag, because there can be shards that come off, and they will do some severe damage to any skin, eyes, whatever. Still hot. That's going to work good. Wasn't much of that. Can't take a good cutting. Try on both sides equally. Got a little scratch on the hub, but that's trivial as long as there's nothing sticking out. The grease is really dry. I'd say there's some places on one of the bearings while it was howling around. Now the clip came out of the inside. I'll take it back over the press, prop this side up so it's level, and then put something in there and press the bearing outer race out of this housing. That may or may not be a fun experience. Now that the hub's out, I'm going to press the bearing out to the side to remove the clip from. And I've put about 6 or 7 tons on it. And it's not budging, of course. Rather than break an ear off of something, just have to take a cutting torch, heat the housing up, expand it so that the bearing will fall through it a little easier. Knock these ball bearings and the inner ball bearing and race set out. I keep, once these discs get ground down to a certain diameter, I just start piling them up so they'll fit inside to cut these. If you get a nasty one, cut a gash through the inside of this. Although a jackhammer might come in handy about now. I just use a screwdriver and tore the inner races out and let the ball bearings fall out. Now I need to cut a gash through the center of this. I took a cut-off tool and cut a gash diagonally through that bearing race. I'm going to hit it with a chisel. See if I can fracture it. I got quite a bit of it busted out of there. Eye protection and long leather gloves is required. Just put that with a chisel after you cut a gash in it because shrapnel goes flying. And it's the same as razor sharp glass flying at you. It is really hard, and it will, well, a piece of it got me there, went underneath my skin, and I had to pick that out of there, but it's best cover everything with a heavy rag or something and hit on it. It's hard stuff. Anything that can damage the chisel like that. That was sharp. It's really been an outfit now. Should have just welded it, I guess. I got it loosened up enough to work. Baby was really stuck in there. Go ahead and clean your lock ring groove out both sides. It's too late to clean it out after you put the bearing back in and find out you can't get the clip in it. And then scrape this where the bearing presses down against this seat. Scrape it clean again so the bearing will fit in there and you get your clip back in the slot. Make sure all that's clean and dirt free. Once you got your spindle all cleaned up, spray a little lubricating oil inside of here. And you can press the new bearing in. Just make sure it starts square and it'll go. Using a nice big 3/4 inch drive socket as a great spacer, start the bearing down in there. As long as you get it started straight, critical. If you get it jackknifed in there, you'll dig up metal and have a heck of a time. Alright. Now stick the clip back in it. Gave the clip a little sandpaper, clean it up. Bearings pressed in, bottomed out against this stop on the outer part of it. Now I just need to squeeze that clip in with a pair of decent needle nose. Snap it back down in there. If that clip gives you too much trouble going down in there, introduce it to a cutoff wheel and open these to the point you need to get something in there to hook onto them, or get it started down in there and just take a hammer and punch and just ease it down on, beat it down in there. Just stay off of this grease seal metal. That's the new wheel bearing for as long as it lasts. Just keep the dirt out of the center of it. That's two halves of a bearing. You don't want the dirt getting in the seam down there. When the brake dust cover came off, I didn't mention it, but before you put the hub back down through the bearing, put your brake dust cover back on. The brake caliper hanger will help hold the dust shield on there. I'm taking some 320 grit and clean the tarnish off of this hub tube. And any rust. The tube's nice and shiny now. It's been degreased, devarnished. It's ready to be pressed back into the bearing. Now to do that, you have to stick something underneath the center of the bearing on the back side and support it from the center race so you don't knock the back race out. It'll come through just flush with the bearing. Spray some penetrating oil on this hub and support the center race on the back side and press the hub down. The bearing is being supported on the center race with a 3/4 inch drive socket. Looks like it's down. And the hub's pushed through. Any extra, the drive axle, if it happens to Once you tighten the drive axle nut down, this will push on through if it's going to go anymore. They're usually about flush with the end of the bearings where it's going to be at. And clean your ball joint stud off, make sure it's dry. I took a wire brush to the drive axle splines, sprayed off some brake cleaner, made sure it was clean and dry and rust free. And check your ball joints for any looseness, tie rod ends, inner tie rod end. And now it's time to replace the brake pads if you need to. Check for irregular wear on them. I'm going to set the spindle back down on here and put some blue Loctite on this threads. It was a self-locking nut. I don't have another one, so we'll just Loctite it into place. This ball joint's going to torque down to 50 foot-pounds. The tie rod end's going to torque to up to 25 foot-pounds, 20 to 25 foot-pounds. And these caliper hanger bolts, 217 millimeters, are going to torque to 60 foot-pounds. And the axle nut is going to torque to 180 foot-pounds. Check your spindle taper holes where the ball joints go in for any oblong shapes, marks, rust, dirt. I'm going to put a light coating of axle grease on these splines for this drive axle so it'll be easier to remove next time. Now to stick the axle in the spindle and push it up into the strut. Put those 17 millimeter bolts in. They torque to 100 foot-pounds. Wire brush off your axle flange and your rotor face. Get any loose particles off of there. You don't want any dirt falling behind there. And if you got the screws, put them back in through the rotor. Check your hinge pins on your caliper hanger. This one's stuck. This one's still free. That one doesn't work. That's why the pads is wearing kind of funny. That unstuck before I can finish putting the brakes on. Go ahead and install your brake caliper hanger and or brake caliper. These bolts tighten to 60 foot-pounds. Install your caliper brake hose hold down bracket with a 12 millimeter bolt. Then install your tie rod end, 17 millimeter nut, torque it to 20 to 25 foot-pounds, and install the split pin, quarter pin, whatever you want to call it. Tighten this axle nut down to 180 foot-pounds. You can either hold the brake or stick a punch in below the brake caliper, whatever. Then insert the split pin, quarter pin into this nut. Put your wheels on, tighten the lug nuts to a maximum of 80 foot-pounds. Ready to go home.